Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Planning a wedding turned out to be a frustrating endeavor, which was a huge surprise to Camille. She had always found wedding planning tedious, but joyful nonetheless. How could it not be? After all, the dress, the rings, and most importantly, the most beloved person next to her. For all her life, it seemed to her that her fiancé would rejoice with her and look forward to the happy day. But instead, he clung to every little thing. For example, he didn't like the bride's bouquet of bush roses. Let's go with peonies, he insisted. They are also very beautiful. A lot of people like your bouquet will cost us $5,000 at least. And we'll pick peonies from a private plot, for example. We'll pay $1,000. They'll hardly ask for more. We'll mix them with gypsophila. And it'll cost us $300 and the bouquet will be great. And we'll save another $3,700. But I don't want peonies. Camille, peonies are corny. They're always incubator bouquets, and the wedding is my day. So the bouquet will be the one I choose. Well, it's my wedding too, the groom gently reminded her. Oh, come on, the girl waved you off. How much do you understand? Marriage is a test, daughter. And that's why, to sweeten the pill for women, they play the wedding first. That's what Camille's mom always said. And that's why your wedding should be your wedding. After all, a husband gets a lot out of marriage. A wife who will take care of the house, the children his wife will bear, give birth to and raise. Well, and of course, loyalty, which is ready to forgive a lot. And for a woman, marriage is most often a lot of patience and hard work. Mom, of course, reasoned in her own way. She herself, when she married Christopher, heard him say to her at once, "You'll never think about money. That's what I take care of. No heavy bags, no thinking about what to save to finish repairs or buy shoes for the kids. I will give you as much money as you ask for, and I will never refuse. But in return, I will also ask you to fulfill a few conditions. Remember them, Emily. First of all, the house and the children are your responsibility. I'll stay out of it. I'll put up all the money I want, but don't ask me to change diapers or choose what color we paint the walls. Secondly, you must never reproach me for spending too much time at work. Remember, it's my job that allows this family to live without needing anything. Thirdly, from time to time, I may get carried away with other women, but I will never leave my wife and children. So without thinking about cheating, none of them will touch you and our children. Now I've told you everything. And you think, are you ready to become my wife? And if so, you can start picking out your wedding gown. It's a big deal, so I won't rush you. If you think about it, let me know." He was being deliberate. Just if you're going to start a project with someone, and Christopher considered the family to be a long-term project, then you should immediately discuss the terms with a partner. Of course, it cannot serve as a 100% guarantee that you will not be thrown away, but at least there will be nothing to blame yourself for. He really liked the smart, smooth Emily in this reserved person, guessed hot temperament and a kind heart, which in the future will allow her to become a loving mother and the ability to support and encourage her husband. But even these fine qualities could not to cloud his mind enough to marry a beautiful woman blindly. Think it over, he repeated. And take your time, the girl thought, then thought some more, but finally agreed. After all, she decided. The groom, after all, is not only demanding but willing. And in return to provide a lot, and in 29 years of married life, Emily has never known a refusal in money, and her husband has not heard a single reproach from her lips. And yet, with a bitter sigh, Camille's mother admitted, "Sometimes it was unbearably hard for me. It even seemed that it was better to live in a poor hovel with my beloved wearing rags, but not to tolerate his mistresses, his eternal absence from home, just not to be obliged to smile. When my heart cries, 'Why didn't you leave?' Camille asked, 'Because I was beginning to think for real. As long as I lived with your father, my personal feelings remained personal. So what if I missed my husband's presence? You can't devote all your time to your family and still make a good living. You have to choose your well-being. It's always been more important to me than anything else. And you have always been warm and cozy, clothed and fed. And any wish of yours or mine, which could be fulfilled for money, was fulfilled immediately. I always had peace of mind about you, and I thought it would be selfish and mean to deprive you of that. Besides, would I suffer less if I didn't know what to feed you? I would have suffered more. That's why I kept on enduring and smiling, even when I didn't feel like it. And even when I wanted to make a scandal, because I used to think with my head, not with my heart. And to tell you the truth, I don't regret it. But you could have been happier with another man. You might not have had money. But love, according to my observations, smiled weakly at my mother. When there is no money, love ends very quickly. Man is so organized that he needs security, a safe home, a nourishing meal. And only then can he think about love. And then, is it an indisputable fact that I'd be happier with someone else? After all, a beggar might be a lazy man who doesn't show his face at home. And that's at best. And if he's a scoundrel, for example, tyrannizes his wife, drinks all the money. I know any number of such cases even among my school friends. And it's really scary when you have nothing to buy fruit and clothes for your children. Are you saying that a lot of people don't do that, don't provide for the family they themselves created? Unfortunately, yes. Emily wrung her hands, and for the umpteenth time, she thought that her daughter was too naive for her age. She sits there and asks in all seriousness, are there really men who do not think it necessary to earn money for the family? But what can you do if your child grew up in a greenhouse? It's the eternal pedagogical dilemma. If you raise your child like a greenhouse flower, you'll end up with a hothouse flower. That naive child, you treat it like a weed. You've got a good chance of getting a felon, a drunk, or a drug addict, and it's not an easy balance to strike. There are men who can't make money. There are men who don't want to. There are also chronic losers. And there are unrecognized geniuses who sit and wait for someone to buy their greatest creation for a lot of money. In short, there are all kinds. It's a nightmare. What did Camille shake her head at? It's just awful. Why do they get married? What a nightmare. So I'm still lucky. My husband knows how to keep his word, how to provide for his family, and I wasn't always worried. We had our happy days, and there were a lot of them. For example, your father always took one day off every month, and we always spent that day together as a family. And once a year, he'd make a whole week to go away with us. And he'd always say, Emily, you pick your own destination. Wherever you say we go, that's where we go. The most important thing for me is to spend time with you. But as you see, even a very profitable marriage, even to a man as reliable as your father. In short, it's a test, daughter. Anyway, the wedding. It's your day. It has to be the way you want it to be. Camille remembered her mother's words well. A long time ago, before she even got married. The wedding. Her day. She didn't realize that her mother had meant that her life would be one of compromise. Camille didn't want to live the way her mother did. Some stupid rules of engagement. Is family a bargain? What about the love that guides and guides and guides? Well, not love, but there has to be some spontaneity in life. Wouldn't it be great to go to Portugal at night? With one backpack on your shoulders, just because you feel like it, or to go sing at a karaoke bar. The girls saw endless wanderings around the world. Hotels and local markets, spices, colorful fabrics, mesmerizing music. And she and Stephen would be the most spectacular couple ever. That's for sure. They go so well together that even in casual photos they look like matched models. And it all starts with their wedding day. Camille really wanted to have the kind of almost secret wedding like in the books. That's why she still hadn't introduced her fiancé to her parents and refused to go to the neighboring town to meet his mother. Honestly, his mother would do just fine. Camille had no desire at all to get acquainted with the future mother-in-law. It was not enough that a stranger's aunt to look at her to evaluate her, especially a groom from a small town. So you can be sure that Stephen Mom with the whole town will share impressions from the acquaintance with Camille. And they're not likely to be positive impressions. Camille has often heard that mothers-in-law like quiet, frugal daughters-in-law. No, the girl was not going to turn into a gray mouse and get under the broom just to please some strange aunt. So she and Stephen would just register at the wedding bureau and then go on their wedding trip. And when they get back, they'll throw a party for the in-laws. And weddings are for brides, isn't it? Said Mom. And there was one thing that made her sorely regret it. Her fiancé, such a nice, modern, advanced in every way, Stephen did not want to agree with the instructions of the future mother-in-law. He argued over the bouquet, over the dress, even over the wedding cake, which, in his opinion, was better baked by himself, instead of ordering from a pastry shop. But it's better to bake a homemade cake. It's a lot of money for quality products. Camille tried to convince him. That's what it would cost. Only a cake from a cake shop would be beautifully decorated, and I'm no good at decorating. And I'm not a very good baker. Why not pay a little extra and get a beautiful cake? I think you're just lazy. You may well decorate the cake, will be and prettier and cheaper and nice that the bride herself tried. I, for example, even a burnt scone from your hands is much nicer than the most delicious cakes from an unknown baker from the pastry shop. I before the wedding only roses from mastic and mold. The girl replied gloomily. This is instead of taking a bath, a good night's sleep, finally show up beautician and masseur to be in a normal form. And by the way, modeling is good. It calms the nerves. Stephen winked, but seeing how offended his beloved, realized that the joke was a failure. And in general, of course, I realize that you are a bride. You've got a big day ahead of you, but a wedding is a celebration of two people. Why is it that only the bride's wishes matter? Because Camille is angry. What is this celebration for you? Will it last a lifetime? And for me? You men always say you don't want to get married, because to get married is to lose your freedom. Does anyone think about our freedom as women? Somehow it's thought that we don't need freedom, that we only think about how to part with it. Well, let's have a wake then. Stephen laughed and hugged his bride. We'll sit at the table, all in black, and drink vodka. Without clinking glasses. Stop being so stubborn. Camille, we're about to get married and we're fighting over a party. Camille shook her head tiredly. That's the thing, I don't want a party. Let's just have a quiet signing, sit in a cafe, eat some cake. Or we won't sit down and do without sweets. And then we'll go somewhere to rest. Then we'll come back and invite the family to visit or to a restaurant. And what prevents us to do it at once? Asked the groom. We will sign, sit with relatives in a cafe, and then quietly leave. Let them stay and drink to our health. It will be good for them and for us. Stephen, Camille, you can't do what you're suggesting, because my family will be offended. I have to respect my family. I see, said the girl. Dry, you have to respect your family. You don't have to respect me and my opinion. Everything is clear with you. Here and another quarrel is ready. Thought the guy was bringing home a distraught bride. This is ridiculous. They can't agree on a wedding on one day. How will they live then? Camille finally decided to voice what had been on his mind for some time. Just please listen to me calmly. Try. Hear me out. Make it short. It's cold, Camille asked. I'm tired and sleepy. Okay, I'll try. You and I can't even decide without fighting. How should we have our wedding? Maybe we should. It's too early to get married. Think about it. The family will have to negotiate for the rest of their lives. You with me and me with you and us. I see, said the girl with a quiet hatred in her voice. And you, it turns out, do not even have the courage to say honestly that you do not want to marry me. You're trying to jump right before the wedding. Not jump, but think about it. Imagine we're married and we want to buy an apartment. I want the 3rd floor, and you want the 2nd floor. Which one do we choose? I'm the boss of the house, Camille said arrogantly. Why do we have to choose an apartment anyway? My parents' wing of the house is empty. Well, it's empty for guests. That's where we'll stay. What if I don't want to live with your parents? He asked. You and I have our own family, and we should have our own place. Why do you need all this? We have everything. Come in, live. Why are you always looking for difficulties on your head, and on mine too? You don't want to get married? Then tell me why you're thinking so stupidly. You don't know what you're talking about. Why you? She blushed red with anger and tears came to her eyes. Come on, calm down, Stephen said conciliatingly. I just wanted to. Come on, forget it. Just calm down. Camille returned home gloomier than a stormy sky. Immediately went up to her room and without undressing, lay on the bed. This is a madhouse, she thought gloomily, staring at the ceiling. Emily looked into her daughter's room. It's okay to come in. Just don't ask me anything. I had a fight with my fiancé about the wedding. Listen, daughter, Mom asked. You don't even live together yet, and you can't even agree. Maybe it's better not to get married. Then the family life will start, and there will be much more reasons for quarrels. You said yourself that marriage is a trial, didn't you? Camille reminded me. Well, that's the test I'm going through. I'm getting tired of it, she sighed. A test, yes, a test. Where's the fun in that? The challenge is right, but your father and I'm sure he was not always happy with me. We never had a fight. Never. And that's because we agreed on everything. Once and for all. We were able to agree, but you can't. What about Camille's silence? It was awkward to ask Mom. Did you ever love your daddy? Maybe your parents felt the same way about starting a family? Seriously? They weighed the pros and cons carefully and decided they could live together. But did they have love? Whether she loves her Stephen or not, she probably does. He's handsome and just handsome. That was enough. No one else she'd ever seen with such blue eyes, such terry hair, such a white smile. Stephen was the only man in the world to whom she was willing to forgive unshavenness and pure boyishness. The unromantic nonsense he occasionally spouted with a clever look. She wanted very much to be his wife, so that all this beauty would go to her alone. In all her 20 years, Camille had only fallen in love once. And this story ended badly. He said goodbye to her, saying that he could not afford to date a rich girl being a pauper. Well, to be more precise, at first he just broke up with Camille, telling her that she was ugly with a nasty temper, and no sane man would ever go out with one. But a day later he called and begged her to meet him. It's very important, he insisted. Everything I told you yesterday was a lie. It wasn't. I thought it would make it easier for you to forget me, but I underestimated how much I love you. I can't live with the idea that I lied to you. Please, let's meet, but let it be in your favorite park. Just please don't refuse me, please. Camille was going to this meeting as carefully as never in her life to come to the park upset and without makeup, to make him ashamed of her behavior or, on the contrary, to appear mind-blowingly, beautiful, and cheerfully, as if everything he had said to her yesterday meant nothing to her, and as if he himself meant nothing to her, and let him be jealous, seeing what a treasure he'd lost. In the end, she managed to find a compromise solution. Camille carefully applied her makeup and styled her hair, but allowed herself the small detail of hinting that she was still a little worried. She darkened the skin under her eyes a little, looked in the mirror, and was satisfied. An ambiguous hint. Maybe she didn't sleep well, or maybe, who knows? Maybe she danced all night, not alone, but with a handsome stranger. Yeah, that would be best. She got to the meeting a little early and sat on their favorite bench. John showed up a minute later. Yes, he was sleeping the sleep of a baby, still as alert and cheerful as ever, his blonde hair neatly styled. His favorite perfume exuded a wonderful scent, the freshness of grass. Dazzling smile, as always with him. The girl's heart gave a treacherous twinge when he came closer and took her palms in his. I knew you'd come, and I wondered whether to come or not. Camille raised her head. It was lazy, actually, but it was a very empty evening. So I came, since there was nothing to do. Thank you, John said seriously. Thanks anyway for having me here. I don't even know where to begin. My parents left me a nice inheritance. I couldn't manage it properly. I spent it all very quickly, and now I'm almost a pauper. But how can I date a girl like you and know I can't even give my sweetheart a flower? It's awful. And if you marry someone else who loves me, how would that not be awful? Marriage will fix my affairs, he promised. She's a fool of age, only happy to pay for my wishes. And what of it? Where else would an old lady get a hot macho man? I'll try to save whatever she wants. I'll put it on my own account. In a couple years, I'll have a decent amount of money in my account. And then, and how am I supposed to live for a couple years? The girl asked. John sighed and ran his finger along her cheek, gently touching it. You are so young, beautiful, don't wait for me better. I'd like to tell you I'll come pick you up in a luxury limo, and then we'll get married and never be apart ever again. But that would be too cruel. 2 years is too long. But you can borrow money from me, Camille begged. My parents have plenty of money, but you and I will never have to part. No, no, what are you doing? He exclaimed. How could I take anything from you? No, no way, never. What a decent boy with high moral principles. A sight to behold. Camille left that meeting. A total wreck. She wished it were otherwise, but it wasn't working. She still loved John, and at the thought that soon he would marry someone else, she wanted to scream, and at the top of her voice with howls like a she-wolf. And then Stephen appeared, simple as he was, but handsome, in love like a puppy. So sweet Camille was pleased with his adoration, and most importantly, she hoped that John, when he found out that his beloved was having an affair with someone else, would get mad and do something, leave his rich old lady. Kidnap Camille right out of the other's arms and take her far away. But the days went by, and John did not appear on the horizon. And then Camille slowly began to grow attached to Stephen. Even tried to convince herself that she loved him. Sometimes it seemed almost true. At least she wanted to marry this handsome man and be the envy of everyone. John, but someday he would find out about her marriage. And even if he didn't show it, he would probably worry. After all, her husband is not an old man, but a young, promising man. And when John's time in a safe marriage is up, he'll come to Camille, and then something will start happening. You know, said the mother thoughtfully, as if by some miracle she had overheard her daughter's thoughts. I think love is one thing. And it happens that you just like someone like a beautiful thing in a store. It's just lying there in the window, shimmering in the light. And you don't realize that it's the way the lamps are directed, so that everything shines and shimmers. But you look at it, and you want it to be yours. And when you buy it, you take it out into the daylight. It's not so shiny anymore, and it doesn't have the same shine. And 2 days later, you don't even know why you bought it. It's very dangerous to give in to first impressions. The thing's easy. You can sell it, you can give it as a gift, you can just stick it somewhere and never remember. You can't do that with a person. Do you think Stephen wants me as a shiny thing? Camille was offended. I don't know, answered her mother. I think you both want it that way. If you loved each other, you'd find a compromise. But you're all afraid. How can you live like this? Family life is a shared labor. It's like cultivating a garden together. And you and your bickering, you'll trample it all over. Camille could have answered that it seemed to her that it was better to fight than to live many years without a single quarrel, because quarrels dissipate passion, and the peaceful course of life lulls it to sleep. The cultivation of gardens. What gardens? Life is one, and it must be lived in pleasure. But fearing to anger her mother, she remained silent. Meanwhile, Stephen was lying on the sofa, mindlessly flicking the remote control, changing channels. He was in a very gloomy mood. Maybe he should have gone to the big city for nothing. He could have lived at home. When he first came here, he didn't come for a visit or a tour, but just to live. His first reaction was fear. There are streams of people going here and there. But everyone's on his own, like in his own capsule. In the shell, only in the neighborhoods settled by natives from the south could still be found what Stephen was used to at home. Here people stopped to talk to each other. They often said hello to acquaintances. Women returning from shopping would sit down on a bench to chat with a neighbor, but it didn't last long. When people come from other cities, they often bring their habits with them and try to live in the same rhythm for a while. But 6 months or a year pass, and they start to change too, because otherwise you just can't live here. But if migrants came here to earn money, he is a smart programmer who came here just to move somewhere. His hometown had bored him and seemed to have been explored up and down. He left with joy, but when he arrived, he was afraid of total loneliness in the crowd. Was it worth it to leave his town for that? He could have lived just as well, and cheaper too, for life here was not reasonably expensive. And the most unpleasant thing was that no one seemed to have heard of economy here. Stephen was used to doing without takeaway coffee and snacks on the run. Just because he knew at home you can eat humanely and not take hours to get home. But unless you are terribly hungry and you get home only in the evening, then okay, you can run into a cafe or even just grab a croissant at the bakery. But here it was different. People don't cook at home. They use delivery or buy convenience foods, which aren't very cheap either, and constantly choose something on the go. Even if it's a couple of subway stops away from home, they spend money on it without thinking about the need for spending. It would seem that they live as they used to. Well, let them live. But you have to behave the same way if you want to become your own. Or the attitude towards clothes. At home, they would just say I'd bought myself a new pair of jeans, and others could ask questions about color or style. But here, the first thing people do is identify the brand of the clothes. Stephen lived here for 6 months, and it still seemed strange to him. And it wasn't that he didn't like it. It was just that he sometimes longed for his own town, where life was so unhurried, so simple and straightforward. He was from there, and the local whirlwind seemed temptingly bright, like a candy wrapper and someone else's phone, which Stephen threw somewhere, either in the bathroom or in the kitchen beaked. I was too lazy to get up, but the trills continued, and I had to go looking for the damned gadget. It was Mom. Yeah, Mom, it's okay. Yeah, I'm fine. Those were his typical answers. But there was something important to talk about today, so the usual yes, okay, fine answers didn't work. Mom, I'm getting married soon. He said, in a month, can you come to the wedding? Mom was confusedly silent. Who is she? She finally asked. She's a nice girl, Stephen answered vaguely. A little spoiled, but that's all right. She's a normal girl and her family is decent. Her dad's been in business for years, a solid man. And her mom, a mother of children, raised 2 sons and a daughter. Normal people. Their daughter is so well-mannered. And how did they treat you? Did they like you? What's your girlfriend's brother like? Did you become friends with him? Is he older or younger? Yeah, I mean, we're my fiancé. Decided to surprise them by introducing me to her family only after the wedding. So I'm still, on purpose. It's her idea, so they won't perform if they don't like me. If I'm the groom, then they can start putting pressure on her brain, discouraging her from getting married. And if I'm already a husband, what are they gonna do? They'll just have to accept me into the family. Stephen realized he was talking nonsense. You'd think the family would never turn wives against husbands and vice versa. And there was nothing informative in his words. He did not say anything specific about his fiancée, and he did not know why. And then suddenly I realized that he spoke in such general phrases only because he had nothing else to say. What did he know about his girlfriend? He knew her name, that she was studying to be an art historian, that she liked fresh strawberries. Well, that's about it. What's her name? Mom asked, as if that would clarify anything. Camille, she said. Okay, son, I'll try to be there. She hung up the phone, and Stephen realized that Mom was offended after all. Well, she had. He'd bring his fiancée to meet his mom. Then the parents would have met, socialized, talked about where and how their children will live. All this, of course, so the children themselves to decide. But it becomes clear what kind of family they are, what they are used to, how they were brought up. Well, they'd eat and drink a little. Mom would bring homemade wine, her own specialty of cherry plum, and then everyone would be happy. And it would have been human. Is that so bad? What kind of town is this? Stephen had a happy childhood. His father and mother always lived very friendly, though they were never lavish. Dad's a physics teacher at a regular high school. Mom's a seamstress. The 2 kids, Stephen and younger brother Robert, grew up as sporty kids. Robert played tennis, and his older brother's passion was basketball. But when it came time to decide in life, Stephen chose programming. And Robert decided to stay in sports. His life was always training camps and competitions, and it seemed that it would continue for a long time. But fate intervened in his brother's plans. At a regular training session, Robert got an injury, which put an end to his career as a tennis player. Now he worked at a sports school and coached the kids himself. It was said that he turned out to be an excellent, talented coach. A year later, he married the mother of one of his students, and the marriage turned out to be happy. He didn't want to hear about moving to the big city. Stephen tried to drag his brother and his family to him, but he heard an unexpectedly calm, balanced answer. Here I have my favorite business, I have some authority, and if I move, I'll have to start everything from scratch. I'm not an adventurer like you. Calling his brother an adventurer was a bit of a slip of the tongue. Stephen was invited to work at the firm's headquarters, so he had to move. At first, he was hesitant, but then he decided that if he refused the offer, he would miss this opportunity. He would regret it for the rest of his life. And although a lot of things in the life of this boiling city was incomprehensible to him, but there were positive moments. For example, he met a lot of interesting people. He was motivated to learn something new, to strive to open unexplored horizons. And then he met Camille at a party where there were a lot of people. And Camille, he somehow immediately noticed, although it seems she was bored. She moved from one room to another, never lingering anywhere and hardly sipping from her glass. A fragile, dark-haired girl with a mop of curls and a childishly whimsical look. "Do you miss me?" he asked, hoping to make conversation, but she looked at him with her big brown eyes and simply suggested, "Shall we run away?" Stephen didn't have to be persuaded. They hadn't just run away from this party, they had kind of fallen out of life altogether. He could barely remember going to work this month. Who he'd seen? Camille and her whimsy. Her curls, her tanned skin, and her infectious laugh filled the world with herself. Sometimes the guy thought Camille was even in the air he breathed. He proposed to her as if in a blur, and she didn't seem surprised at all. She calmly accepted and began to plan the wedding. Stephen's equanimity seemed a little strange to her, but as time showed, strangeness in general was in the character of his bride. If not even touching on some serious things, then there were still enough quirks. For example, wearing sneakers, she always laced them up again, or a stopped watch on her hand. If she happened to walk down the street, she always chose the right side. What's this whole wedding thing worth? After all, what's the idea of all the dating after the wedding? And to live with her parents. And if they send their parents with such requests, they'll say we, my daughter, and your husband is the first time we see, so why should we let a stranger into the house? But Camille didn't seem to have considered that option. Camille woke up this morning in a great mood. She had finally managed to convince the groom that the wedding was an almost intimate affair and that there was no need to make a fuss. Registration at the wedding bureau, cake at the cafe, and then it's off to the airport. The wedding trip beckons in its own romantic distance. Okay, not to convince him, but at least to squeeze him so we don't fight anymore. Now finally, it was finally possible to quietly do normal women's things, and first of all to sign up for a beautician and a masseur. It is necessary to somehow get rid of the endless stress, which gave her her unruly fiancé. "I even got a pimple on my forehead," she complained to her mom. "Stephen had to work out my nerves so much that I started to get pimples. The pimple will come off philosophically," Mom remarked. "I think you're in a hurry to get it over with." Well, for example, do you know what kind of family he's from? You know his parents. Maybe you should meet him first, see what kind of family he's got. That could tell you a lot about your future husband. But here you are again, Mom, for your own. The girl wrinkled her nose. But I know, when you and Dad got married, there were completely different orders, customs. These traditions of your outdated. What was wrong with them? Mom was surprised. Yes, your father introduced me to his family, and I could see that it was a real family. Hard workers, where the men consider it their duty to provide for their wife and children. I saw that there were no alcoholics. No criminals. Of course, genetics doesn't solve everything. But you can't deny the influence of heredity either. And I could be calm about genetics and heredity. I saw how they talked to each other, and it became clearer to me what my fiancé expected from me. Well, it's an old custom, Camille said. That's the way people used to live. And now it's all old. So now no one does it before. If you got married, you have to socialize with the whole family to visit, to come to your place, to receive. And then Daddy had a family right next door. Stevens is in the next town. Well, he'll go home once a year. That's all the communication you need. There's no family influence on personality, and there never will be. I wouldn't be so sure about that if I were you. There was a father's voice at the door. Mother and daughter turned synchronously to the man. He entered the living room, kissed his wife on the cheek. "Hello, my dear. I decided that today it is possible to rest." Camille looked at her daughter. "I don't know much about child rearing, and I always thought my mother could do it better than I could." but now I feel obliged to tell you that I fully support your mother. What's it like to marry someone you don't know? If you want to know what kind of fruit a tree bears, look at the roots. Where do you look? Where do I look? That's where I'm looking. My daughter snapped at me. Do you live with your mom? Well, maybe I'd like it differently. How did the father raise his eyebrows? Share your plans, we'll be interested. Camille groaned inwardly. What kind of people are these? She tries her best not to tell them too much to be polite, and they just force her to tell them the inconvenient truth to them. I'd like to travel more, learn new things, have new experiences, broaden my horizons. Then I could do charity work in between traveling or even during. Now very many people organize their own charitable foundations. It's in fashion. I would travel, do charity work, and talk about it online. That's a good point my father made. But that takes money. Traveling is tickets, hotel accommodations, tour fees. Of course, some of the money is for souvenirs. And then, of course, vaccinations, health insurance, charity work are the bigger expenses. And if you want to tell online about your adventures, you'll need to learn how to tell. It is interesting to post beautiful photos. At first, you may need helpers, a copywriter, a retoucher. They need to pay, and good specialists are not cheap. Again, money. So where do you plan to get it? Camille stammered and fluttered her eyelashes like in a cartoon. I'll have to get the money. Right. Her father nodded nonchalantly. You're getting married. That means you're an adult and you're starting a family of your own. So where are you going to get money for traveling and charity work? Oh, me. I thought you'd be helping out. We definitely will. You bet we will, but not with money. How then will I be happy to do things with my grandchildren, said Mom. And I added, Father, I will help you find good builders when you decide to build your own house, and always recommend a good car service. So you can count on our help, but not financially. Although my mom insists that we invest in the wedding. Well, I won't argue with that, but that's it. Camille still couldn't get her thoughts together. It seemed to her that nothing much would change in her life once she was married. Well, except that Stephen would be all hers. But she thought they'd live in her parents' house. There'd be enough room for 3 families. They would have a separate wing, and they would furnish it to their own taste. And it would be a pleasure to come back here from long journeys. Or maybe they wouldn't have to furnish it. She was going to spend at least 10 months of the year traveling. And the charity? Camille had not yet thought about what she wanted to do. It would be possible, for example, to help young artists to organize for them such an art space. Something like a boarding house, where anyone can live for free and create masterpieces. You see, the daughter said softly, Mom, you don't even know where you will live. How? On what? You don't know how you will earn money for your family. You've already planned the wedding, that it's just one day, and then there's life. But you haven't thought about these important things. How many are still early? Camille, very early. You are in a hurry. I will remain an old maid with your wisdom, said the girl, offended. Well, it will be bad. So divorce all sorts of celebrities 10 times married. Go out, that I'm worse, or what? I may also want 10 husbands and generally get away from me. Suddenly, Camille cried out with sobs. You've lived like this? Everything went smoothly for you. And smart, sensible, so smart that I can't stand it. And I want to do things my way, not yours. If you don't want to help, don't. We'll do without. Stephen is a cool programmer. We'll live on our own. We'll buy an apartment and build a house. We'll have kids if we want them. And you're not the boss of us. And my father chuckled at the fact that you've spent almost $1 million on your personal expenses this month. Dad remarked, that includes trips to ski resorts, shopping, and eating out at restaurants. And of course, beauty parlors. Camille ran noisily out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Tears were choking her. It seemed her sweetest parent was determined to spoil her with money. That was the only thing missing. And these were the parents. These were the people who'd gotten to the point where money for the baby counted today's dress fitting, already almost certainly derailed. You can't go to the dressmaker looking like that. Her eyes are as red as a dragon's cheeks. But do I even need this dress now? Her parents are going out of their way to talk her out of getting married. Her father said he's not going to support her and Stephen's family. I guess you're just gonna have to figure out how to live your life. Or maybe it's just a stupid test. Will she refuse to marry or will go all the way to get what she wants? Stephen signed the contract and finally stepped out of the bank's air-conditioned coolness into the normal air. He'd been approved for that thrice-damned loan, and now he could pay for the pointlessly expensive dress and everything else. Stupid, of course. Of course he understands. A wedding is an event, and for a girl, it's especially important. You want to be a princess on such a day. Still, it's necessary to know the measure, otherwise you can be left with empty pockets. But if you marry such a girl, then you have to live up to it. Of course, he'll be able to pay off his debt. But it would be wise to spend the money on something really important, like a down payment on a house. Now he was renting an apartment in a good neighborhood, but he was paying at least a third of his salary, and he still had to support his wife, who had not yet voiced any plans for her future job. And what will she earn? Art historian Glamorous will be a guide in the art gallery. She'll work at a museum. It's not a salary, it's just for pantyhose. So the money for the family will fall on his shoulders. Well, after all, whether he's a man or not, God willing. And Camille will realize that you can't live like a butterfly. That is, flitting from flower to flower without thinking about anything. The girl's father looked thoughtfully at the way his daughter ran out of the room and slammed the door. Maybe I was wrong to do that to her, he asked his wife. I was earning more and more money, providing for the family. There was no time for upbringing. Maybe you'd better be able to convince her to talk tactfully. No, honey, the wife said. You did the right thing. And you don't blame yourself for what you said. There's nothing to blame yourself for. Our daughter has to grow up and start thinking about serious things. I've spoiled her too much with money, he said with conviction. I gave her what she asked for, but I didn't show her how the money was earned. Where does it come from? I'm used to a woman's whims being fulfilled, but I didn't take into account the important thing. A wife is an adult. She runs the house and raises the kids. It's a lot of hard work around the clock, and it's rewarded handsomely. It is possible and even necessary to spoil your wife. And a daughter should know that money doesn't just fall out of the sky. You've always been generous, Christopher. Emily. But that's what a head of household should be. And now you've decided it's a flaw. No, honey. Camille is just growing up a little later than her wealthy peers. If we've done anything wrong, it's that we haven't taught her the value of work, the value of money. So what you said about a young family being able to count on anything but financial support, that's exactly right. Maybe you're right, Christopher. But you know, I've been thinking of something. It might be stupid, but it might work. Let's do this. Sit next to me, my good girl. I want to consult with you. It seems to me that we should first of all get to know this Stephen. But I know she doesn't want to. She generally, I think, feels that you and I have lived like ancient mammoths and understand nothing of her advanced youth. But still I'm sure we should get acquainted with the future son-in-law. Well, at least to make sure that he is not a marriage scammer and not a criminal, not an alcoholic. And I would also like to meet his parents. Oh, and the scandal will be, sighed the woman. What will we have to endure? It's scary to think about. Christopher, do you have any idea what Camille will do when she finds out? I'd rather she had a scandal, the man said firmly, than you and me having to get her out of trouble later. She's a girl. She may not see the real danger. She may not care. Don't you agree with me? I agree very much. I don't like the whole story myself. Camille is so conspiratorial. It makes me think bad things. I don't know why it's a private wedding. Why can't the future husband be introduced to his parents? Maybe he's the one who insists on it, not our daughter. Well, then why would he do that? Well, don't worry about it. Her husband patted her hand. I'll try to find out through my channels, and then as agreed. Camille walked to her favorite park. It seemed like nothing special, just fields and paths. But here she always calmed down, no matter how upset she was. And now the girl hoped to find some peace of mind, because a storm was raging in her soul, threatening to tear it to pieces. Absolutely everything in its path. But why didn't anyone want to understand or accept her? With her views on life, with her desires and dreams, no one wanted to even hear. Mom's all about getting to know each other. Dad's all about money. Weren't they ever young? Didn't they ever want romance, maybe even madness, but a special one, which you will remember with awe for the rest of your life. And after all, isn't that enough? She's had enough of that money herself. If John had money, they wouldn't have broken up. And if she was poor, maybe he wouldn't be so hard on her for being poor. All that got in money, all that trouble. And the parents add to it. It's so down to earth, it's rude to meet the family. What are you gonna live on? That's all they're interested in and nothing else. The wedding was a few days away, and no, I wish I could be a little excited about it. All the time I had to explain something, prove something, defend my right to be happy. Why did she need this injustice? The girl wiped her tears and took a deep breath. It is necessary to calm down. And there was nothing to waste time. She still had time to meet with her dressmaker. She couldn't leave the dress unfinished. She stood up from the bench and smiled. The park was her magical sanctuary. Helpful again, comforting, and gave her strength. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Stephen whispered affectionately. He must have repeated that phrase about 50 times today. And he was even a little tired. First of all, Camille had had a fight with her parents before the wedding and had proudly gone to live with her girlfriend. Stephen offered to just move in with him, but the bride insisted. "We will live together only after the wedding," she said categorically. "And then you and I haven't talked about it yet, but I don't like your apartment. It's only one level. There's no jacuzzi tub, and a jacuzzi before bedtime is a sacred thing. Anyway, after the wedding, we'll find something more suitable." Secondly, Camille was unhappy with her dress. The neckline, in her opinion, was not deep enough, and the dressmaker hadn't taken care of the fresh flowers. To embellish the dress, she did. The fresh flowers would all wilt in an hour, the groom remarked, and the dust might stain the fabric from such an insensitive statement. Camille burst into tears and her wedding makeup blurred. I had to do a quick recolor, so she wouldn't be late for her own reception. But that wasn't the end of the bride's woes. "This wedding is a nightmare," I moaned. The girl is already at the wedding bureau, standing hand in hand with the groom on a wide staircase. The photographer, like an industrious bee, hovered around, endlessly clicking the shutter. "That dressmaker seems to have left a pin in the seam," Camille said. "It's stabbing. There will be a hematoma there by nightfall." "Well, let's get out of here." "I'll take it out," Stephen suggested. "No, let him take it out first." Camille had not yet told me that the high hairstyle was also making her uncomfortable. She was afraid to turn her head. Suddenly, all this beautiful, abundantly decorated with a scattering of small flowers. The structure would collapse. "We'll get to the cafe, and there I'll let my hair down." They chose a cafe. It was a wonderful little hall. And on the top floor, there were several VIP rooms, each of them decorated in its own style. There was Hawaii, and there was Japan. There were even the Arab Emirates and ancient Russia. Stephen liked the Russian version better than the others. But Camille insisted on Japan. It's tasteful, concise, very stylish, and you can take great pictures. She decided. "And we'll eat the wedding cake with chopsticks," laughed Stephen. "With chopsticks," confirmed the girl. "And then we'll keep those sticks as a souvenir. One pair for you, one for me. I think that's better than keeping a bunch of bouquets." They've decided on a cake, too. "We'll order a small one." Camille decided, "It's just the two of us. Let it be a bento cake. We'll eat it in half. We'll have champagne, and that'll be it." Fortunately, Stephen agreed to this option without trying to argue. In fact, he was suddenly surprisingly compliant. He uncomplainingly paid for the wedding outfit and the bride's bouquet, and even did not refuse to find a good photographer. On their return from the wedding trip, they planned to order him a couple more photo shoots in a romantic style. And the receptionist was already waiting for them in the cafe. "The Japanese-style honeymoon room has been rented for an hour," she said. "If you want to stay longer, we will pay." Stephen knew instantly. "No problem. Follow me." The girl smiled and opened the door to a completely dark room in front of the newlyweds. "What is this?" Camille was stunned. "Have you turned off the electricity?" But at the same moment, the light flashed blindingly bright, and several voices simultaneously chanted congratulations. "Congratulations." Camille blinked in amazement as she recognized her parents standing by the set table. Shit, it went through her head. I told you, I told you. No guests. But that was far from the main disappointment. Next to them were the elegantly and discreetly dressed parents of the bride. Standing there was a real misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. It looked exactly like some unfamiliar, full, even fat woman dressed in a horrible green dress. The most nightmarish one imaginable, with waves and some ridiculous, lacy J-bud in her earlobes, jiggling, blowing round earrings of all kinds of gold in her hands. She was clutching a rather flaccid bouquet of peonies. A few petals had fallen to the floor and were now lying at my feet like garbage. "Mommy?" Stephen got excited, and the woman rushed to hug him. "Happy wedding day, son," she whispered. "Congratulations, Camille." Christopher smiled. We know you planned it a little differently, but Evelyn and I talked it over and decided that we wanted to do it today. But don't worry, we won't be gone long. We'll have a glass of champagne. And then we have our own plans. We'll be gone." "How glad I am that you could come," Stephen repeated, hugging his mother. "Meet my wife, Camille." "Hello, darling. You're my daughter now. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope you'll be happy with my son." The woman handed her the bouquet, but Camille suddenly moved away. Who had invited her here? In a voice ringing loudly with tension, she asked, "Who invited this woman here without consulting me?" "Who did? Who exactly?" I smiled, of course. "She's my mom, and she wouldn't forgive me if I didn't invite her to the wedding." "I was hoping you'd understand that, but you wouldn't listen. I had to make that decision on my own." "So I did, and we did," said Camille's father. "Your mother and I really wanted to meet Evelyn, so we went to visit her and insisted that she attend. And of course, no one thought to ask me if Camille was finished. Even though I've said many times that there should be no strangers at my wedding." "Who are you calling a stranger?" "My mom." Stephen was astonished. "She's my own person." "How can you say that? That's exactly what she is to you. She's nobody to me. But you don't give a damn about me. You did it your way. You invited her here. That beggar, Camille." Father raised his voice. "Apologize to Evelyn immediately. Look at her, Papa. Aren't you ashamed to be around that aunt? Look and look closely at her dress after my great-grandmother's fashion. These horrible jewelry, these flowers. Did she buy them on the street? Stop it, Camille." Stephen raised his voice. "And I demand that you apologize too." "I should apologize. After the mess you made of my wedding after you ruined my party, that's classy. It's my fault." "No, you won't." She turned to her mother-in-law. "Don't shove that broom in my face. You weren't invited here at all, and you can get out of here right now. And you better get out right now. Because in a minute, I'm gonna call security and have you thrown out of here." The mother-in-law calmly put aside the bouquet and smiled meekly at the girl. "What do you say, Camille?" "Congratulations, Stephen, once again." Stephen silently took his mother by the hand. "Let's go together. Mom, if my wife still talks like that, there's nothing for me to do about you either. I'll file the divorce papers myself. Camille, goodbye." So that's how the girl responded. Betrayal, then. You traded your wife for that mom of yours just so she wouldn't be upset. Poor little thing. Camille tore up her bridal bouquet in a rage and threw the fragments in the groom's face. "You bastard. You bastard. Embarrassing me like that. You set this whole thing up on purpose so you wouldn't marry me because you realized I cost you a lot and you're a pauper, just like your mother. I hate you. There goes my dad's hand. Now it's all out in the open. Evelyn, accept our sincere apologies for what you've had to listen to. And I believe your son made the right decision. Camille is truly unworthy of him." Ah, that's how the girl squinted. "Then listen to my story. I promised your son $300,000 to marry me. Isn't that right? Go on, tell them you're the right one. Not like that." Stephen turned his back and squeezed shut. He was painfully ashamed to remember it. "I wouldn't have taken that money." Muffled, he said, "I just knew I'd never marry Camille any other way. And I really wanted to. When did I meet her? Camille was so kind then, so cheerful, laughing a lot. I kept admiring her and thinking it would be nice to marry a girl like that. But I realized she was different. She lived differently, and we're different. I knew she couldn't be interested in me. She'd need another fiancé with money, with connections. And apartments like she's used to, huge apartments. Travel all year long with 5-star hotels. But I realized it was all just a dream. And I tried not to take our affair seriously. I was afraid I'd get really attached. But all the time the thought was so obsessive that suddenly she agrees to marry me. Maybe she's waiting for me to ask her to marry me. And I don't. And then one day I did. And Camille said yes. And calmly, as if she'd been expecting it. But she stipulated that in 2 years we'd be divorced and that we'd have a child. If there is one, she'll leave it to me. And for all this $300,000, $150,000 right after the wedding and the same amount after the divorce. I thought about it and decided to let it be on her terms. I'll try to get her to get attached to me somehow. And then there won't be any divorce. Well, it's silly, I guess. But I was very much in love and I wanted to be with her. And when I asked her why the conditions, she said it was the right thing to do. And that was it. I found out later. What was it? You found out there was this John guy or something. He and Camille had a thing, maybe nothing serious. Just a flirtation, that's all. But Camille was in love with him. And this John marries a grown woman with a son his age. And you wanted to get back at him. Christopher figured it out. That's how John got back at Stephen for the girl. He told Camille that she was ugly with a bad temper and that no one would take her as a wife. And she told him it wouldn't be 2 months. How will she marry? She'll live with her husband for at least 2 years. And then she'll leave him because she'll have found someone else by then. You bastard. Camille whispered hatefully. You bastard. I've worked myself to death to keep from running away from you. You're a cheapskate. I've been trying to make myself believe that I love you, and I almost believe it. And that you're handsome at least. I already got used to this wedding, and hoped that you'd get your head back into place, that you're an idiot, that you'd understand something. And you couldn't find anything better to do than bring your mom in here. What's the point of having her here if it's not real anyway? How interesting is this? Christopher stretched. Indeed, young people have completely forgotten how to talk and solve problems not for money. Or is it only the golden youth? It's not about money, Stephen muttered. It's that I was a fool to hope that Camille could love me. And now I see that she loves no one but herself. And probably not even herself very much. Let's go. There's no point in hanging around here. No, wait, his mother stopped him. Why doesn't Camille tell the second part of the story? What second part? Stephen was confused. I don't know what I don't know. The part that her beloved John, as it turns out, is a marriage scammer. He married a woman from our town. And it just so happens my friend and his name isn't really John at all. It's Michael. And he's got a lot of cheating wives like that. But the worst of all is that my friend, before she brought the scoundrel out into the open, several times heard him talking on the phone with a woman he calls Camille. And now I know what kind of Camille she is. The woman straightened to her full height and looked contemptuously at this Camille girl. He'd said they absolutely had to wait 2 years until he could get his money affairs right and advised her to take care of herself, spend time with others, maybe even meet a good man and marry him. And all this he served under the sauce of caring for his beloved. He said, I understand. You're a young girl. You want attention. And I can't give it to you because I'm busy. He didn't hide the fact that he married my friend for money and said that he had no other choice. He would never do that to Camille because he really loves her. And apparently our fool Camille believed him. But then, when John was finally arrested for fraud, who did he call his accomplice? Camille. That's right. And I hoped it was a misunderstanding. I believed it, and it was only now, when I saw what this girl was like, that I realized she was very afraid of being investigated, and that's the only reason she wanted to stay on the road as long as possible. Instead of going to her parents, explaining her mistake, asking for help. Camille, you're just a soap bubble, inflated to an unbelievable size. But if you touch it, it bursts. That's the whole story. Poor John realized it before he did. That's why he didn't marry you. He knew Christopher would figure him out in a heartbeat. And then he'd be in trouble. Now she looked at Stephen. Come on, son. I'm sorry, Christopher said again. And here's the thing. As moral compensation, I would like to close the loan that Stephen took out to marry my daughter and my wife. And I are very sorry for the way things turned out. And it's good that it's all coming to light now, said Evelyn, or things could have been a lot sadder. Returning to the city where your childhood and a solid chunk of your youth passed is always an adventure. Whether it's happy or sad depends on the person. Here Stephen found the return to be a joy. He enjoyed recognizing places familiar from childhood. And the changes for the better did not escape his attentive gaze. The repaired road, the construction of a new children's center. It all delighted him. You know what, Mom? He said, I was just thinking that there is such an expression the way to yourself. I lived in a big city, and I liked it there by and large. I came here, and all of a sudden it felt like I was finally home. Maybe you just haven't gotten used to it yet. Mom asked. No, it's different here. People are simpler here. Life is clearer. People are less arrogant. There's our neighbor. He seems to be a big man by our standards. He owns 3 stores. Do you remember his car? He drives an old car and nothing bothers him. He's happy with that car. So he doesn't buy another status car. And you know I like that. I like people without wrappers, like candy, Mom laughed. Sort of. It happens that the wrapper is beautiful, but inside there's something hidden. It happens, of course. Evelyn sighed and looked anxiously at her son. His hint was more than transparent. Yes, wrappers and bows inside, as long as he was not disappointed in girls. After all, it is necessary to get married and have children. He's drawn to that. Stephen suddenly smiled dreamily. You know, Mom, I want to buy an apartment in that building over there. You can see it behind the trees. It's a beautiful house. Can you imagine, when I get married and have kids? It'll be great to walk here with them and play hide and seek. There's so many trees around and a swing set. No, I definitely want an apartment in this building. Then you're in luck. Dad's former student is selling an apartment in this building. Do you want me to call? And if he's home, we can go in right now. Come on, Stephen's excited. Call right now. He was calm and clear in his heart. At last it was possible not to pretend, not to lie, not to dodge. He could just be himself. Stephen had never realized what a valuable gift this was before. That's what his mother had said. He's not home right now. But his little sister Jenna is. She can show you the apartment. Come on, he decided. The apartment was on the 2nd floor. Stephen was happy about that, and it was low. And at the same time, it doesn't feel like living on the street, he said. It was just right. The door was opened by a short, very slender blonde woman. Hello, she smiled broadly. Come in. My brother called me about you. The apartment was small, but it seemed very spacious. That's because the layout is very sensible, she explained. It was built for people, not for performance. I really like it, Stephen praised. I'm ready to buy it right now, honestly. Then, Jenna, do you need to wait for your brother? He'll be here in half an hour. Would you like me to make you some coffee? Yeah, I'm confused. Stephen, I don't know. This is convenient. So you're in no hurry? No, don't worry. The girl waved her hand. Let's go to the kitchen. Oh, Stephen, I forgot. Suddenly, Evelyn was alarmed. My neighbor asked me to buy her medicine. Here, I'm just sitting here. I'll go quickly. Why don't you sit here? Wait. I think Jenna said, confused. Does your mom need help? No, smiled Stephen. She just wanted to leave us alone because she noticed that I really liked you. The girl lowered her eyes in embarrassment, but after a moment she raised them and gave Stephen a charming smile. And you to me, she admitted. John was a phenomenally lucky man. Although he had been detained on his ex-wife's application, they had never been able to find a crime in his actions. But you yourself gave him valuable gifts, didn't you? The investigator said sympathetically. No one forced you. But after all, he lured it all away from me, literally indignant woman. Try not to give him a new car, so he'll walk around for a month frowning. And that's no personal life. I have a headache. Let's sleep. And so almost every night. The investigator smiled slightly. I sincerely share your indignation. Dear Wendy, but unfortunately, I can't help you. For the investigation, all this is just your domestic relations, which are not relevant to the case. But understand, there's nothing criminal in a headache or a bad mood. It's if he blackmailed you or used physical force. That's all we need. Wendy shook her hands. For him to hit me, that would just be a good reason to. In short, we're going to have to let your ex-spouse go. What do you mean, let him go? He'll get away with it. I'm afraid so. All I can do is advise caution in the future. John called Camille in the middle of the night. I got away from that sorpus, he whispered into the phone. Honey, we can finally be together. It's true, I'm broke. But I have my parents' old apartment. We could move in there. One word from you. I'll pick you up right now so we can start a new life. The girl's heart jumped with joy. Had he finally realized that love was more important than money? She thrashed around the room haphazardly, picking up her things and piling them in a heap on the bed. I'll be ready in half an hour. I will quickly pack already. At the very doorstep, Camille faced her father on a new journey is going to. He asked, pointing to the bulky wheeled suitcase Camille was dragging behind her. You could have warned him. Not a trip, she replied. My favorite man has proposed to me, and I'm going to move in with him. We're going to live in his apartment. Father nodded seriously. This is your favorite person. This is the same marriage scammer John, who only a miracle saved from jail. Camille blushed thickly. That's in the past, she said. He's separated from his wife, and now we are. And you expect me to believe him? That such an immoral type would forget his habits and become a good husband. I love him. Daddy, don't talk down to me. You better let me go. They're waiting for me. Father stepped aside. Go if you want to, but you can only come back here after you've parted with this scum. John was already waiting for her. Camille was amazed at how bad he looked. His hair was disheveled. It was time to freshen up his haircut. There was a ketchup stain on his sweater for some reason. I'll tidy up later, he laughed and took the suitcase from the girl. Now let's go home. But let's go to the store on the way. There's no food at home. Let's go, Camille agreed easily. There it is just over there, the sign is glowing. But at the checkout, the girl was waiting for an unpleasant surprise. All her cards were blocked. 10 years later, Camille's house was just as full. All kinds of surprises. The pipes burst all the time. And if the pipes were fine, they'd blow a fuse. If the electricity was fine, the taps would leak. Or the neighbors upstairs would flood. It wasn't boring. But there was no mystery in all these surprises. Just the house was very old, and it had not been overhauled for about 50 years. Besides, it was inhabited by a very specific contingent. Most of the tenants had inherited the apartments, and they lived in them without trying to earn money for something more comfortable. Many of them drank every weekend, and when they were drunk, they managed to fall asleep in the bathtub, forgetting to close the faucet. But in 10 years, you get used to everything, and Camille gradually came to terms with leaky pipes, broken fuses, and regular floods. What was there to do if John only had such a place to live? And he was lucky that at least it was with his talents as a wasteful life. He could easily have just sold the apartment solely for the sake of eating in restaurants until he ran out of money. But he himself seemed to have long ago ceased to be embarrassed by his lack of glamour. He felt like a king in his shabby apartment, or at least a man who had found his place in life. And that place was on the old sofa in front of the TV. John sat on the sofa with everything he could possibly need immediately: a large bag of chips, a remote control, and an open bottle of beer. Camille, passing by her husband, only shook her head tiredly. It seems that from the old John so vividly unforgettable, only the unforgettable is left. Memories, that is. Of course, her parents, having learned that Camille was going to marry her shabby Alfonso, did not give her a standing ovation. Quite the opposite. Christopher immediately blocked all of his daughter's credit cards and announced that as long as she intended to stay with John, he wouldn't give a dime to help her. But Camille was firm. She was sure that if she could convince her parents that she had true love, they would immediately thaw and start helping her. But they didn't. She had to move into John's tiny apartment and try to organize her life there. John, who had also been hoping for warmth on the part of Camille's parents, had long ago realized that there was nothing to wait for. And if that was the case, then what did he need a wife for? Camille irritated him desperately with the way she walked, the way she talked, the way she looked at him. From time to time, he tried to explain to his wife that the time had come for them to part. But Camille didn't want to hear about it. I've already been dumped once, she said. I was shamed for the rest of my life. So no. John would never do it again. And John, utterly tormented by her incomprehension, began to look more and more often for solace at the bottom of a beer bottle. He grew very fat, and the once clear lines of his face were spreading and losing their shape like dough that had risen. Camille, on the other hand, had also lost a lot of weight. She had completely abandoned fitness, and she had to forget about a healthy diet. With the little money she managed to earn at the museum and John, as a security guard at the store, it was hard to get by. Camille gained a dozen extra pounds and decided to stop dyeing her hair to save money. And now, 10 years later, she's gone gray. Whether it's from living like this, or whether it's another mockery of fate, John didn't notice it though. He hardly noticed her at all, except in exceptional cases. Get away, cow. You're blocking the TV with your ass again, he growled. You've gotten fat, like you don't know what you're doing. You're a disgrace. Look at yourself, said Camille. You don't look back, you're drinking beer like a madman. What do you look like? What do you look like? Like a fat hog, you're a lady's heartbreaker. I wish I'd known what you'd become. I'd rather stay with Stephen. There's yours. Stephen John pointed his fat finger at the TV screen. He's doing interviews with the news. He's a genius programmer. He's got his own company, and they're showing his woman. So she's not like you. Camille looked back at the screen. She thought John was hallucinating, but she was wrong. Indeed, Stephen was smiling on the TV screen. He seemed even more handsome than before. He had his arm around the waist of a pretty blonde. Camille eyed her with avid curiosity, a woman who had long since forgotten about grooming. Stephen's wife was not much of a wife herself, as they say, a 3. She had an unremarkable face, albeit with the right features. You wouldn't know it if you washed it properly, but it's easy to make beautiful. All you need is a little more color. The hair was good, long, thick, with a beautiful shade. But that shade was expensive. Camille knew that because her mother was blonde. And caring for her lightened hair cost a lot of money and constant trips to the hairdresser. Tinting, nourishing, moisturizing, trimming split ends, touching up roots, and evening out the color. Yeah, Stephen must be doing pretty well financially now. If his wife can afford to indulge in such expensive pleasures. And her dress is a lovely pink dress with a moderately revealing waistline. What's the waist? John, obviously, also noticed the waist and hummed expressively, glancing at his wife. Camille only shrugged her shoulders. Her husband earns money and has no reason to work. And money and time too. She has enough for normal groceries and sports, she said. She'd marry him. The husband sipped another beer and scratched his bulging belly. He would have given you a royal life. Now you'd be on TV with him instead of this chicken. It's a shame you missed the groom. Tell me you're offended. I feel bad for getting involved with you. Camille said bitterly that I'm a young woman. I'm stuck in this dreary hole working for a few dollars. All because I fell in love with the wrong man. You'd think I was holding you back. John was offended. Camille didn't answer him. It was already threatening another scandal. Camille had grown tired of them in 10 years. In general, John really did not hold her, but it was still afraid to leave him, like going back to her parents. After all, ashamed to admit that failed on all fronts in career and personal life. His father will lecture him on everything. He'll help, of course, but not without lecturing. And Mom will look at me with such pity, it's better not to imagine it. No, she's not ready to take it yet. That can come later. I'm not holding you, and you're sitting here like you're tied up. The husband started up again. And then it turns out it's my fault. Who's stopping you from leaving? Go back to your mom and dad. They'll take your lost daughter under their wing. Why don't you go? I guess you haven't reached the bottom yet. So I'm not going, said Camille. And it wasn't clear whether she was saying it to her husband or to herself. She had not yet reached the point where her life with John would end. As yet, she had not even determined where that limit was. But she had no doubt that it would come. And then she would leave and be glad of it. Light, cheerful, ready to admit her mistakes. She'd go back to her parents and try to rebuild her life. And maybe she'll even succeed.